The Arctic is one of the most biodiverse and ecologically unique regions of the world. Mammals and plants with the ability to survive in the cold and dry Arctic winter and the presence of life within sea ice are some of nature's wonders that can be found nowhere else on Earth. The Arctic status as one of the more isolated, untouched regions of an overdeveloped world is precisely why it is intriguing to many. But what has especially cast the light on the region and has induced a scramble to invade the once remote area is what lies below the ice in the depths of the Arctic Sea, which is a vast, untapped oil supply. And as an Arctic nation, Norway will play a big role in determining the fate of this once pristine region, which now faces the threat of being smothered in development. As the westernmost country on the Scandinavian peninsula, neighboring Finland and Sweden, Norway is surrounded by the North Sea, which is shared with the United Kingdom, and the Norwegian Sea, which reaches as far north as the Arctic Ocean. Even further north is the Barents Sea, over which a territorial dispute with Russia has only recently been resolved in a cooperative splitting of the region.
On Wednesday, September 15th, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and Norwegian Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg signed an agreement that peacefully concluded a dispute that had stretched back 40 years regarding a shared border region in the Barents Sea.
Initial enthusiasm over the Arctic's potential oil supply began with discoveries in the 1950s. The discovery of gas at Groningen in the Netherlands in 1959 encouraged the belief that portions of the North Sea under Norway's jurisdiction might contain vast oil and gas reserves as well. At the time, when this region of the world was still relying heavily on coal and imported oil, the potential for oil development on Norwegian territory garnered widespread attention. Norway was not technologically advanced when it came to oil and gas exploration, but this would not stop it from finding out what lied beneath its ice, and in its eagerness, Norway was quick to invite experienced foreign oil companies to explore in the North Sea. The first licensing round, granting exploration rights to foreign oil companies, was announced on April 13, 1965. 22 production licenses for a total of 78 blocks were awarded to oil companies or groups of companies. One of these companies was the Petronord Group, which made the first discovery, called Ekofisk, in 1969. With this discovery, the Norwegian oil adventure really began. Production from the field started on June 15, 1971, and in the following years, a number of major discoveries were made. Foreign companies dominated exploration off Norway in this initial phase and were responsible for developing the country's first oil and gas fields. Norway's intrigue in the Arctic as an area containing a vast supply of untapped resources continues today as the threat of peak oil comes upon us and as the pressure to pump a consistent flow to the European Union steadily mounts. In 1965, 85% of known reserves were available to oil majors, and now only 16% is available. For Norway, it is looking to offset a one-third decline in production of its oil fields farther south. As Norway's Minister of Petroleum and Energy, Ola Borten Moe, warned, if we don't invest, we might lose another third within the next decade. The extreme likelihood that an oil crunch will face the world markets has Norway looking with hope to the Arctic yet again, but this time to the untapped areas further in the north. Waters in the high north, such as the Barents Sea, have recently been recognized as possible areas for development. A 2008 study by the U.S. Geological Survey estimated that the untapped resources of the Arctic amounted to 50 trillion cubic meters of natural gas and 44 billion barrels of natural gas liquid, making it a very attractive region for desperate producers. Additional pressures on Norway have it looking further north. As Norway has become such a crucial player in the world oil markets, it faces pressures to maintain a steady output. Norway is the largest oil producer and exporter in Western Europe and the fourth largest natural gas exporter in the world. Its supply is crucial to the European Union, with 90% of its exports going to European countries, the top importers being the UK, Netherlands, United States, France, and Germany. Many of the world's oil reserves are not exactly located where the friendliest governments are, So European governments are looking to stable, economically prosperous countries such as Norway to meet their energy needs. The EU thus depends on Norway's oil and it's pressuring it to maintain its production. Tim Dodson, Executive Vice President of Statoil, acknowledges that the race is on for positions in the new oil provinces of the Arctic, such as the Barents Sea. In the face of such pressures from the European Union, with the threat of an international oil crunch, and with the promises of the High North region, Norway would be expected to crack down, exploring and producing to its full capacity immediately. From the beginning, however, the Norwegian government has been fully aware that an uninhibited scramble for new oil in regions such as the Arctic could overwhelm its stable liberal democracy, strong education system, welfare state, and environment, and could potentially cause the Dutch disease that commonly plagues oil-rich countries. Typically, oil-rich nations, in their pursuit for more wealth, focus all of their resources on development of the oil industry, which can be detrimental to other economic sectors, the environment, and social programs that thereby receive little attention. In anticipation of such risks posed by unchecked resource extraction, Norway has adopted several strategies and a general approach informed by the need for governmental participation and strict regulation in such an explosive and economically volatile industry. For example, from its first discovery, Norway divided its continental shelf territory into blocks and slowly granted foreign oil companies either exploration or production licenses for particular sections. But exploration and production blocks were never granted simultaneously and were awarded over several decades, something called sequential licensing, a strategic way to avoid having the resource industry overwhelm the Norwegian economy. Norway has also managed its resources and wealth through a state-owned oil company called Statoil, which was created with the knowledge that the industry's productive efficiency would have to rely on a separate body designed to exclusively control state oil, but that was still connected to the government. Since 1972, joint ventures in which Statoil holds at least a 50% share in any singular production contract in Norwegian waters has allowed Norway to absorb the positive influence of an experienced oil company without forcing it to entirely submit its industry's sovereignty to a foreign major that might not approach development so carefully. Another example, more associated with the Dutch disease itself, is when resource extraction produces wealth, there is a tendency to reallocate factors of production, such as capital and labor, from previously booming sectors of the economy to resource extraction, causing these other sectors to shrink. In Norway's case, the economic sector under most threat from a booming oil industry would be the fishing industry. However, through income coordination, Norway has been able to limit wage increases to sectors besides the resource sector to ensure they aren't left behind in the wake of an expanding oil industry. The Norwegian government has also been able to strategically shield its economy from the threats of a booming oil industry by investing abroad in the Petroleum Fund of Norway, now called the Government Pension Fund Global. As of 2011, it is the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world at about $600 billion.
We created the fund to keep the income from the oil and gas sector separate from the Norwegian economy. The reasoning being to avoid inflation, increase wages, and loss of competitive edge.
Only 4% of the fund is used every year and allocated into the state budget. Managed by Norges Bank Investment Management, the fund has grown to 3 times the annual budget and is expected to reach $1 trillion by 2020. Norway's methodic approach to development is epitomized in the more recent debates over production in the potentially oil-rich regions that are the Barents Sea and the Lofoten Archipelago. The Barents Sea region could produce about 500,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day by 2020. And the resolving of the territorial dispute between Russia and Norway, which has lasted for decades, could finally open the way for development and even herald joint projects. But the Norwegian government's High North policy includes a management plan that outlines regulations regarding the pace of resource development and environmental standards within the region. Further, according to the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, the Lofton archipelago in the North Sea could hold 8% of Norway's undiscovered oil. But debates over how drilling will affect Norway's prized fishing industry, the environment, and the livelihoods of residents makes up one of the biggest political fights ahead of governmental elections in September, with some officials arguing for a ban in development. Of course, ironically, what is making these areas available for development is the melting of sea ice. As spokesman for Greenpeace expressed disgust in Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and Norwegian Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg, it just shows the greediness of Russia and Norway that the first thing they talked about is not global warming, which is what's making this area suddenly accessible, but resource extraction. Oil in the Arctic is calling to every nation desperate to secure a supply in a time of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Extraction of oil in the Arctic is expected to increase, and Norway's pursuit in the region might signify that it is not ready to move on from such an economically boosting resource. But compared to other oil-rich countries whose governmental corruption and dependence on oil exports really does render them greedy, Norway is actually relatively careful and methodic when it comes to capitalizing on resource opportunities. By encompassing the environmental, health, and economic implications of new development, the management plan and debates surrounding the archipelago demonstrate that Norway's priorities still rest on the prosperity of many parts of its society, rather than the success of a singular industry